All right, I think you're all in the wrong presentation. I'm just kidding. I will be upfront and honest that I am a tad bit nervous. So, yeah, welcome. 10 communication tips for new security managers. My name is Chase Palmer. That's my lovely picture over there. I am a senior security analyst at Lucid Software. I've been there for just about 5 years. I've worked in GRC in one way or another for the last 15 years, and I spent a great deal of time of that 15 years dealing with PCI compliance, back when nobody has even heard of PCI compliance. I think we were on PCI version 1.2 when I had started, and now we're looking at 4.0. I spent a short period of time working for the government, and I will never do that again. That wasn't fun. As I said, I've been at Lucid for about 5 years now, and I manage an awesome team of security analysts. The last two items on my list here I feel are just a bit obligatory. I am the founder of a nationally recognized nonprofit organization, and I do have my CISSP certification. I used to have a slide in here that says, no, that does not make me a hacker, because I am not a hacker. And we will get into that later. So I want to know why you're here. So by raise of hands, who here is a seasoned manager who's managed teams for a while? Okay. How many are new managers? Somebody in the last couple years started managing. Okay. And then, sorry, the lights got down, now I can't see. How many are on track to become a manager or have career plans to become a manager? Good, that's a lot. And how many of you are here to learn lessons so that you can tell your boss how to act properly? There you go, that's everybody. Sweet. All right. So one of the things I really like about coming to security conferences is we have an opportunity to connect and discuss certain topics. We can agree, disagree, we can agree to disagree on different approaches to different situations, such as, is it better to get your ISO 27001, or is it better to go for a SOC 2? Is FedRAMP really worth it? Do you pay the ransom if you get ransomware? Or if you're really clever, do you ransom the ransomer? But so really, unless you're out there to watch the world burn, we're all on the same team, and we have something to contribute and to learn from each other. What this presentation is not is a technical presentation. I'm not going to get into details about technical stuff. There are lots of technical presentations, and I will be the first to admit that I really enjoy technical presentations. I'd rather be next door, listening to Troy talk about hacking Apple AirTags, or down in the communities. But we go too far with technical presentations. If that's all we do, it's like skipping leg day. And then we look like this really cool fellow here who could probably break my arm just by looking at me, but it leaves your security program a bit unbalanced. Now, in all fairness, the other way around, if you don't focus on any technical stuff, it's just all policies and nobody's doing anything. There's no enforcement, and you end up looking like this guy who probably rides bikes for a job or something. He probably has an easier time finding a shirt than the other guy, but I would imagine it would probably be really hard to find pants. So before I get into the heart of the presentation, I'm going to start off by saying that I am by no means an expert in what I'm going to present today. I'm still learning a lot of this myself. This presentation is compiled from things that I have learned from leaders, other leaders, and from mentors in my life. But these aren't just theories. These have been tried and tested things and have been proven to work. So I've tried to provide some examples wherever I can about my personal experience, but where my experience is lacking, I've collected some examples from others who have been able to exemplify the principles that were being discussed. I also want to emphasize this. Knowing something and doing something are two different things. It's not enough to sit here and learn something and say, oh, that's great advice. I could see how that works, and then not do anything about it. So I personally still have a lot to work in these areas. And if you find yourself saying, oh, I like that, then do something about it. You won't regret it. So if you want to get something, take a picture of this screen here, and then you can go typing on your laptop and ignore me the rest of the presentation. But this is what we're going to talk about. These are my 10 communication tips. I'll give you a second. I'll wait till all the phones get put away. Okay, got a straggler in the back there. 1 second. Good? We good? There we go. All right. All right, so we're going to kick things off pretty strong with our first tip, and which is having risk-based discussions. All businesses face risk, and what we do as security professionals is mitigate or reduce the risks within the business. So when we associate tasks with risk mitigation, it's far easier to provide it's a lot easier to illustrate the reason for performing a particular task. So tying a risk to a task helps communicate that a lot better. To take things a step further, if your supervisor or executive is involved in security risks and helping identify them and address them, the sense of urgency to complete a particular task may come a lot easier. Dale Carnegie illustrated this really well in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, when he said that when you let other people feel that they came up with the idea, you'll get better buy-in from the people that you're trying to win over to your way of thinking. So get them involved. If you're not already performing risk assessments within your organization, you'll want to start now. You can start doing things in an informal way, just by keeping notes and keeping track of them. Something's always better than nothing, but eventually you'll want to work your way to a more mature program that's regularly identifying and discussing and monitoring risks. Risk assessments are great for uncovering things that may have gone unnoticed, and sometimes things that people try to ignore or think will go away. And risk assessments can be very prescriptive, depending on what framework you're using, but they're all pretty much the same. You identify an asset that you're trying to protect, think about all the great and terrible things that could happen to that asset, and then determine what the probability and impact would be for that particular scenario, and assign a risk score. A key part of managing risks and deciding what should be done at the company and what that priority should be is to have a risk statement. And that risk statement should be adopted and approved by executive management. So here's an example of a risk appetite statement. It establishes the scale in which the risk will be measured and which risk will be given the highest priority. So an example of how this has worked. Several years ago, we had some employees that were using their laptops for displays at trade shows. And those laptops, they were being used to run looping presentations, videos, or even provide demonstrations. There was a lot of strong pushback from the IT and the sales team when this was brought up, and we asked them to stop doing that. They argued that the cost of additional hardware to be able to have dedicated hardware for presentations and such was, or trying to keep track of multiple laptops and that kind of thing was just too much. But when we talked about the risks associated with having an unlocked laptop, In our salespeople having access to large amounts of data about potential clients, current clients, details of our service and pricing, lots of corporate data on their Google Drives. When they had their laptop sitting there, they had disabled the auto lock feature, and it's really easy if there's a laptop sitting there, you can get distracted and let's see the laptop walk off. So we assigned the probability that something like this was going to happen, and gave it a risk score, and it was above our risk appetite. And when we had that discussion, it became a lot more apparent to both IT and to the sales team that we needed to have a different solution for them. So now we have dedicated hardware that our sales team uses for presenting at or have at trade shows and conferences that is pretty locked down. Can't access anything. It doesn't have any access to any of our corporate data. All right, move on to our second item, which is involving others in our decisions. Involving others when making decisions, we're not talking about deciding what you're going to eat for lunch, or who's going to take the kids to school or something like that. What I'm referring to is decisions like what security framework should we use, should we implement a new control that requires you to re-authenticate your SSH key every 5 minutes, or what be it. When you involve others in decision-making, you are able to not only get a different perspective of the situation, but you also get a lot more detail. So a case in point is we had two systems. Each had a different classification assigned to them. So they were processing different types of data. We had a policy that dictated the frequency for session timeouts, and a decision was made to set a timeout for service A for 7 days, and service B had a timeout of 30 days based on that policy. We started getting a number of complaints that people could no longer log into service A. After we dug into it, it turned out that access to service A was dependent on the access to service B for authentication. They were tied together. When service A would expire, service B wouldn't. And so when somebody tried to access service A, service B would say, yeah, you're good. We've already given you a cookie, so we don't need to give you another one. It was only after somebody logged out as service B that they could re-log into service A and refresh that session. So even though service B had a more laxed policy assigned to it, it was determined that it was going to be a lot easier for us if we tied the two together. And so service B had a more restricted timeout assigned to it so that we didn't run into problems with service A. If we had involved the users of service A into the discussion before we made the decision to set the session expirations, we would have avoided some headache. This is a simple example that has a relatively small impact on some productivity, but other decisions could have a greater impact. What if someone decided that a particular database was no longer needed and decided to drop it, only to find out that certain historical data was being kept in that database? Now, hopefully you've got a backup of that database that can be restored, but what if there wasn't? So involving others in decisions can help in revealing details about a situation that was previously unknown. Another benefit of getting someone involved in the decision-making process, especially if that person is in your downline, is that you'll get better buy-in on the decision since they played a part in making that decision. Those who are involved feel a much stronger connection to the decision and want to be a part of making it happen. Okay. Tip number 3 is, we've talked about a little bit, and back up your decisions with policy. Security governance is central. It's the central glue that holds a good security program together. Policies shouldn't, though, be arbitrary rules to force employees to march in order under your dictatorship, but rather they are previously agreed upon decisions that are made to mitigate risks within the organization. Without security governance, organizations can make widely different decisions based on the time of day, the food they ate, or the mood that somebody's in. This creates a bit of chaos and sends the organization down an aimless path. Security governance helps bring consistency to decisions and provides the map that will guide future decisions. Policies not only make decisions easier, but it provides a certain level of protection to the organization in a legal sense, and its protects the organization and the employees. So if we remember the story, it shouldn't have been too hard to remember. It was only a few slides back. The employees were disabling the auto lock feature on their laptops for those trade shows. The auto lock is a technical control that is used as a contingency for someone forgets to lock their computer when they walk away. But it's also a deterrent for thieves since they have a very limited window for an opportunity. And if it's functioning properly, closing the lid will immediately require a password to unlock it again. This is a pretty basic control. It's built into most security frameworks, and it's considered a best practice. When it came to that particular situation, it made it a lot easier to decide what to do because we had made the decision a long time ago that it was important that we lock our computers. And so it provided a guide for us to show that it was important to the company that we needed to go down a certain path. And those policies were reviewed and approved by our executive team. So we had executive buy-in. Now, sometimes policies don't fit every situation, and exceptions need to be made. A proper policy program will have an exception process, but every exception should be reviewed on a regular basis, and exceptions should be relatively rare. If you find that if exceptions to policies are becoming the rule, it might be worth revisiting a policy and determining what the risk is that is driving the policy, and either adjust your risk appetite or the policy needs to be rewritten to reflect the expected behavior. This is a tough one. Admit that things can be improved. As much as we like to believe that we have the best security program out there, there's always so much more to do. And the goalposts are always moving. Things are inevitably going to fall short, and it's best to admit that things can improve than to try and justify our current state of affairs as being good enough. So, tip 4 is admit that things can be improved. So we live in a world where technology is changing so fast that it's impossible to keep up. Starting to feel like my dad sometimes, where I can't figure out how to do things. I don't do social media. I don't know how to use Instagram. I don't know how to use Facebook. So I now sympathize with my dad. But bad actors are always finding new ways to exploit systems faster than we can fix them. So it's important to say that whenever security controls are in place at our organization, it's impossible to say that our security controls are perfect and that there would be no room for improvement. I don't know how many of you have been involved in audits, but audits can be an eye-opener and a truth teller about how comfortable you really are with your security controls. I've been involved with lots of audits, and there have been several times where there have been concerns from the auditor from the auditor and from others within the company that controls were being bent to fit our current practice, and we were trying to convince ourselves, and in turn trying to convince the auditor, that what we were doing was meeting the control, when it probably wasn't. Or we have a control, but it's not operating correctly. Nobody's following it, and we're not addressing the real issue. I've started to come up with a term for this. I call it squinting at controls. And if I squint hard enough, maybe I can make an unrelated practice fit into a control. So I always try to avoid squinting at controls when I'm in an audit. But there's also a natural tendency for us to see auditors as enemies rather than allies. When I approach an audit, I try to see it as an opportunity to get an external perspective on our security controls. And if an auditor believes that something may not be satisfying the control, I see it as an opportunity to improve and make things better. But don't get me wrong, I don't roll over when every time an auditor brings something up and we disagree, especially if I believe that a control actually satisfies, or a process actually satisfies the control. But I will bring it up with the auditor and I'll have a discussion with the auditor. What usually happens is those discussions usually come down to what the underlying risk is, going back to our first communication tip. So what are the risks and the control, and what is the control trying to mitigate? When we uncover the risk that was driving the control, we have a much more productive conversation, and we can demonstrate to the auditor that what we have is in fact meeting the control. It may not read exactly as the control is written in a particular standard, but we are meeting the spirit of it, and we are in fact mitigating that risk. But in cases where we aren't addressing the risk, we use it as an opportunity to mature. But now, I'm sure there's some of you out there that are shaking your heads, and I will admit, sometimes you really get a sadistic auditor that just wants to see you squirm, and if your control isn't implemented exactly as it's written, they're going to flag you, and there's nothing you can do about it. But that's a whole different communication tip, and we're not going to cover it in this presentation. So, but I do know they exist. I've been involved in them, and it kind of sucks. So, okay. This one, I'm sure few of you out there are looking at this and like, why would I fail on purpose? That sounds stupid. And to be honest, when I first heard this, that's exactly what I thought. But it may not be what you're expecting, but it is our number 5 tip. Our 5th tip is to fail proactively. Has anybody heard of this, failing proactively? Just a couple. I'm guessing you're probably involved in programming or something. So this is from Google. Google states that proactive failure is the practice of generating notifications when monitoring values approach a known failure threshold and not waiting for the system to alert you that it has already failed, or worse, to find out from customers that your application or service is down. We can apply this to our professional lives, not just a technical or an application sending logs and monitoring those logs. This is communicating with others that that something is going to fail ahead of time before it fails. So it's a natural tendency for us to want to impress our superiors and take on everything that comes our way. And we want to be seen as yes people and not no people. As security professionals, I think we all get the reputation that we shut things down because we're terrible people, and we want to fix that. As human beings, we seek out praise, and oftentimes we feel like being agreeable to something, we will get that praise. The problem is we can easily get to the point where we've taken on too much, and we'll end up doing more harm than good. Disappointment is defined as a failure to meet expectations. So if you want to avoid disappointing somebody, set the proper expectation. And this is where the concept of proactive failure comes into play. It's better to communicate failure early on than it is to wait until a deadline closes in or is even passed. By setting the correct expectation from the beginning, we communicate our capacity for our workload. Does this mean that we have to turn down work that may get assigned to somebody else? Yes, maybe, sometimes. But that's not always the case. So here's an example. And this actually happened recently. Halfway through a fiscal quarter, I was approached by our legal team, and they asked me if my team could do an audit of 37 customer contracts to validate that we are continuing to be compliant with the terms laid out in the contract. The request to get these, they originally requested these to be done by the end of the quarter, so about a month and a half. To take the project on would require us to put some of our current projects on hold, and that would mean that we would miss our OKR goals for the quarter. So my response back to the legal team was to explain the situation. I was in an agreement, so I agreed that a review of the contracts was important and beneficial and needed to be done. However, I wasn't sure it was possible for us to accomplish the task in the given time frame, and that it wasn't more important than the current work that we were doing. So I had proactively failed the task that was presented to me. And as it turned out, after additional conversation, there was no urgent need to accomplish the task, and in return, we were asked to set the time frame on when we could get it accomplished. By communicating the probable failure of the project from the beginning, we were able to set the proper expectation and priorities for our work, preventing the team from having to work extra hours to accomplish everything that was on our plate. In a lot of cases, such as the one I just shared, the timing of a task is negotiable. So no need to work yourself to the bone for no reason. All you're doing is setting precedent for future situations, and that can be hard to undo. So what can we do about those cases where timing is not negotiable and you have to pivot? Proactively fail. When you know that something has to give, it's better to notify those stakeholders of the project or task that you have to give up or delay, to notify them early on and explain the situation to them. So it's always better to communicate a failure early on than it is to wait for the deadline to pass. And that sets the correct expectation and sets the right capacity planning for your team. So, communicating failure is not a sign of weakness or ineptitude, but the failure to communicate is. Okay, this might also be another hard one for people. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. I struggle with this one. And it's common. I think we hear it a lot, but I think we need the reminder. There are so many specialties within security, and I would venture to say that none of us is ever going to have a full, in-depth knowledge of every single aspect of information system security. That's a lot. You'll probably have a good amount of knowledge about, or an extensive knowledge about one or two of these areas, a good deal of knowledge in a couple of others, and a high-level knowledge of just about everything else. It's more likely that you'll have to have people that report to you that know more about a subject than you, and that might be why you hired them. It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. So being a leader doesn't mean that you have to know everything. It means that you know what resources you have, who have particular skills, and then leverage those skills to succeed. When your directs win, you win. That doesn't mean that you don't have something to contribute. Just don't dismiss someone else's expertise because you feel like you have to be the smartest person. If you're consistently in a room asserting that you know best, you'll just come across like this cute little guy on the slide. Okay, tip number 7. I struggled with this a lot when I started managing, and I still have a lot of work to do with this one. We need to have directs solve problems. As a manager, you may have this sense that you have to be the hero that steps in and solves all the problems that arise. What you may not know is that you're actually doing more harm than good when you try and solve the problems that your teams face. When you're seen as the only person that can solve a problem, you have set yourself and your team up for failure. Not only are you now a single point of failure for your team, but you're also stifling the growth of those who report to you. They won't learn the skills they need in order to solve problems. I'll hold on to this slide for just a sec. I'm just not going to read it. So there's a really cool article called Who's Got the Monkey by William Onken and Donald L. Wass. It was in the Harvard Business Review. In the article, the authors share a story of a manager who would take upon himself to solve the problems that his team came across. He would put in long hours and stay well after his employees had left the office. He began to realize that while he was stuck in the office solving the problems for his employees, they were at home enjoying time with their families, doing their hobbies, and socializing. He decided that this wasn't fair and he needed to make a change. The authors then share the analogy of tasks being like monkeys. We all have monkeys on our back that need to be taken care of. They need to be fed. They need to be taken out to go to the bathroom. They need to play, I guess. But the author shares the analogy of that when we approach somebody else with a problem and we want them to solve it, we are handing that monkey off to the other person to take care of. And when we take care of other people's monkeys, we're not able to take care of our own. Things as simple as, let me look into that for you, or let me see what I can do, are bait for monkeys, and they will always find a comfortable place on your shoulder and demand your time and your attention. So the recommendation here is to be careful about what monkeys you take on from your directs. One way to fend off those monkeys is pretty simple. Ask questions. In a leadership course that I attended, the instructor challenged us the next time we had a problem brought to us, that rather than offer up suggestions or make any statements, only ask questions. Asking questions will force the other person to really think about the situation, and a lot of time they will be able to come up with the right conclusion. Keep in mind that it's not perfect. Sometimes the direct doesn't have the knowledge to solve the problem, or they've come up with a really terrible solution. But hopefully those situations are the exception and not the rule. The more you do this, the more confidence you'll give your directs, and fewer problems will need to be brought to your attention. Okay, this one, man, I keep saying they're hard. Communicate business impact in familiar terms. This is avoiding jargon. It's really easy for us when we work in highly technical fields to spout off. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but we can really confuse people. In fact, some people use technical speak to sound smart. It may work for those who are not familiar with the topic at hand, but studies have shown that the overuse of technical jargon actually indicates that the speaker isn't actually sure about what they're talking about, and it's really unnecessary to complicate a conversation that could be held in simpler terms. So I think this video will do a good job at demonstrating what it feels like to be someone when someone is speaking to them in unfamiliar terms. I hope this works. We tried this.
The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite, surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing, in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fan.
Yes, that was once me, extolling the virtues of retroencabulation. Now, I may not be the dashing young on-camera narrator I once was, but if history tells me anything, it's that the Battle of Hastings was fought in 1066. But that's not the point. The point is that encabulation has a rich, sumptuous history with a delicate, flaky crust, relatively unknown to emergent cybersecurity personnel. Allow me to elucidate. The discovery of encabulation was quite accidental when engineers in the skunk works at Mutual Polydynamics coupled a transcendental Hopper datoscope with a spiral decommutator via the application of anhydrous angling pins, resulting in a device that allowed frenetic mastication at alarming speeds. The device was kept secret for many years, owing to the horrific accident that occurred shortly after its inception. Howsoever, the U.S. Department of Defense and the National Guard soon realized its potential as a weapon of choice, leading to its next iteration, the hydroencabulator, which they nicknamed Fat Boy Slim. Understanding the grisly bare fact of the devastation that would result from its deployment, the project was retubed and transmogrified for industrial supplications. This version, known as the pseudo-encabulator, was the infernal Faustian engine that allowed post-war America to realize its aspirations and become the domino player on the world stage. Everybody was encabulating.
I do not understand you.
Well, I knew you wouldn't, but if I'd have told you before, the ants meter on the other side permeates the canoe to spell hepulous, and that's the entire secret. There you have it.
During the tumultuous 60s, the psycho-funkadelic vinyl encabulator emerged as the long-haired hippie people's answer to their parents' aging technology, scarving a resonance groove in the hot wax of a new generation of encabulators. However, interest in encabulation waned precipitously until the late 80s, when the public was ready for the next transubstantiation of encabulation, extraordinarily populist turbo-encabulator.
Now, basically, the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it is produced by the modial interaction of magneto-reluctance and capacitive directance.
Which brings us to where we are today, floundering in the wake of the obscenely similar retro-encabulator, featuring yours truly, living proof that leveraging existing assets is not plagiarism. Now, despite encabulation's unparalleled success in reducing sinusoidal depleneration through advanced dingle-arm technology, it has failed to meet the unanticipated needs of the cybersecurity industry to create zero-trust operations in level 0 monitoring environments to ameliorate zero-day process attacks. That is why, despite zero interest from industry, the SANS ICS security team upon themselves to develop an entirely new level of encabulation, unresponsive to the needs of the average consumer and undoubtedly without merit in terms of concomitant asynchronous communication with client-side connectivity. Ladies and gentlemen, ISACs of all sectors, beer included, and children of all ages, may I present the hyper-encabulator. The hyper-encabulator is nothing less than a key ruminant in the advancement of retrograde phenomenology, by which we can achieve spastic, and cynosynclastic without sacrificing both normative reality and AI-informed modalities. You'll note that the hyper-encabulator utilizes indiscrete modules, making possible virtualized environments that include PLC-controlled stand-up reheaters, as well as Retanium-based cloud benders. It also includes a dedicated OT Security Operations Center access panel, known as the SOC drawer. The primary modules of the hyper-encabulator are stackable, DIN-rackable, and unhackable. And please note the complete absence of side fumbling, owing to the maintenance of tolerances allowing a tight conniption fit. Please take little note of this module. The open-source digital ghost daemon, which allows transparent OT invisibility owing entirely to the manipulation of airborne particulate matter and single-surface reflective devices. Or, for criminal infrastructure sectors where the dependability of supramotive Wendelsprecks is essential, our handsome ransomware hypervisor is perpetually alert to SQL injections of Gates tracking chips and quantum IoT identification dots. Moreover, whenever a pen test is elected to assure the integrity of a safety instrumented system, our Purdue model modal module defeathers and plucks clean every proverbial fox in the henhouse and keeps would-be intruders wondering which metaphor got mixed first. As you can see, the hyper-encabulator has reached a high level of development. Whereas previous dissimilar devices operated under the concept of manumatic stressor reduction and macroeconomic supply chain SBOMs, the hyper-encabulator operates totally under the principle of colonic effluvium expulsion and audible gaseous eructations. Thomas Edison once said that invention was 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. If that's the case, Thomas Edison should have invented deodorant, but I regress. In the near future, hyper-encabulation will ultimately replace all traditional cybersecurity safeguarding processes with osculating segmentation and entropic astrogation, making what was once thought to be impossible, probable. At SANS ICS Security, when we're not innovating, we're encabulating.
Oh, there we go. So, I don't know about you, but if somebody stood up in a keynote and presented that whole entire thing memorized, I would be impressed. But I thought about trying to do that here, but it was gonna fail horribly. So, yeah, talking familiar terms. It may at first make it sound like you're smart, but in the end, it's just gonna make you sound really dumb. Oh, there we go. All right. The rest of the presentation is not as entertaining, I promise. I'm sorry. So we need to I can't, I'm off track. Create a vision and a roadmap. So start with why. Figure out how to align your goals with your company's goals. Let's see. And then regularly review that roadmap and make sure necessary adjustments are made. Roadmaps communicate not only to your team, but also to stakeholders, executives, on the directions that you'd like to go over a particular period of time. And it can be a little bit difficult. When we developed a roadmap, the first thing we did is in this top left, that's left, in the top left corner, we took a bunch of different frameworks, different assets, different things, and we went through them and decided or found areas that we were lacking in, and threw those in some sticky notes and categorized them. We then took all those sticky notes and stuck them in a matrix that was rated off of the impact or the value to the company and the difficulty it was to implement that particular item. And then we took those items, focusing on the bottom right quadrant, which is going to be low difficulty with high impact, and laid those out into a linear timeline, trying to figure out what things we should work on. Now, it's worked really, really well for us. We have a good roadmap of where we want to go, but we're constantly needing to make adjustments to it as new things arise. We get different requests from customers and whatnot. But it's a good way to see where we need to go and how to communicate that to involved parties. All right, and this is our last one: engage and give feedback. This was a principle that I unfortunately didn't learn about until a few years back. But being engaged in the work of your direct report sounds easy, but from my personal experience, making a transition from being an individual contributor to a people manager is not easy. For the longest time, I had been an individual contributor. I was in charge of my own work, and I got my work done. I knew how to do my work and what was efficient for me. And then what seemed like overnight, I was managing a team of 4, and I found it difficult to trust my team to get things done. But this wasn't because that I felt like they were untalented or untrustworthy. It was because I didn't think that they could do the things the way I did them. And so there was a tendency to hold on to the things that I did as an individual contributor and failed to make the transition to a manager. So at first, it may make you feel important that your contributions are valuable, but in the end, as I said it before, the opposite is true. The more that you hold on to the work that you feel that only you can do, the less engaged you're going to be with the work of those that report to you. As you disengage from the team, several things begin to happen. Employees will begin to feel that they're not valued, that they're not seen or heard. They will, and this will compound over time, and they'll feel a disconnect from you as their manager and fail to bring up things that are important to them and their satisfaction in their job. Second, employees don't receive the necessary feedback to help them grow. If feedback doesn't happen, the employee won't feel that the feedback, my notes are really weird here. All right, Okay, if regular feedback's not happening, when feedback does happen to be given, the employees won't feel like the feedback is genuine. And the feedback will, and if the feedback includes correction, they won't take it seriously. And finally, the team will feel like they don't have a direction, and the team will no longer feel or function as a team. So now you might be asking yourself, but what about the work that you were doing before? Well, the answer is delegate it. Delegate that work and be engaged with the team as they work to figure it out, and give regular feedback to the team members to help guide them and direct them, and get to know your team members so that they feel comfortable in bringing questions and concerns to you. That will help the team feel valued, and they will feel that they can trust you to have their best interest in mind. As a manager, your performance isn't measured by what you do individually, but how you guide your team and what you're able to achieve together. So, a real-life example from a friend of mine kind of puts this in perspective. He was a manager of a front-end engineering team, and his colleague was the manager of a back-end team. Basically two sides of the same coin. It was critical that both teams work together to make things work smoothly. My friend spent time each week meeting with his team in one-on-ones, daily stand-ups, and discussed their projects, provided critical feedback to them to help them grow and be better. The back-end manager took a very different approach. He believed that telling people what to do lowered their job satisfaction as well as his own. He was largely absent from everything. All he was doing was approving time off. The team, and he never pushed them to be better. As time progressed, the collaboration between the two teams began to deteriorate. The back-end APIs were designed, created, and deployed without the front-end team's knowledge. Features started to break, backwards compatibility no longer functioned, and customers started complaining. My friend tried meeting with the back-end manager to resolve the problem, but the back-end manager refused to step in. Eventually, the back-end manager was let go, and the two teams merged under the management of my friend. This was a shock to the back-end team, who became very comfortable with the laissez-faire approach, that when structure was brought back into the mix, several of the team members quit. The ones who stayed felt relieved with the change. Under the previous manager, they explained that there was no direction, no accountability, and no growth. It was absolutely every man for themselves, and it was exhausting. Under my friend's management, the remaining back-end developers once again felt part of a team that worked together rather than against each other. As a result, productivity increased, and the product began to work again properly, and customers were satisfied. So my tips here are: 1, to be engaged with your team. 2, regularly meet with your team and try to make this a daily occurrence, especially if anybody on the team is working remote. Meet regularly with each team member individually. My recommendation is meet at least weekly and keep to that schedule and let them drive that discussion. So have one-on-ones. And finally, give regular, meaningful feedback to the team and team members to help them grow. This is different than criticism. There's no such thing as positive or constructive criticism. Criticism does not come from the heart and rarely results in positive results. When feedback is delivered correctly and consistently, those on the receiving end will know that you mean well and that you are on their side. And terrible transition to the end. So, I will be around if you have any questions, but I won't answer questions up here because it makes me too nervous. So, but yeah, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.